I just watched the new Garfield animated movie, and I'm here to share my spoiler-free thoughts on it. This latest installment follows our favorite lasagna-loving cat as he reunites with his father, Vic, and gets entangled in a heist to pay off a debt. Garfield's popularity in pop culture is undeniable. My introduction to Garfield was through the live-action CGI hybrid movie starring Bill Murray. While I didn't love that movie, I had a good enough time with it as a child. I never bothered with the second movie where Garfield goes to London, but I approached this new animated movie with low expectations. However, I was intrigued when I heard Chris Pratt would be voicing Garfield. While animated movies are primarily targeted towards kids, I don't think that should be an excuse for not enjoying them as an adult. There are plenty of animated movies that manage to captivate both children and adults alike. Let's start with the positives. The movie is innocent and doesn't have anything offensively bad about it. It delivers what you'd expect from a Garfield movie. Garfield engaging in hijinks, eating lots of food, and hating Mondays. John, Garfield's owner, has some standout moments and provides some of the funniest parts of the movie. I appreciated the family humor that's clearly aimed at parents, and there's a small but sweet sentimental message about treating animals with respect, illustrated through a subplot involving a bull and a cow. There's also a touching subplot where Garfield tries to rekindle a lost love, which I found genuinely sweet. However, the rest of the movie was a snooze for me. The humor felt safe and not particularly memorable, with some jokes falling flat even in a family-friendly environment. The movie tries too hard to be modern and trendy, which came off as annoying rather than endearing. There are multiple references to current technology and social media, like characters talking about downloading Tinder and Bumble, or the villain wanting to record Garfield to go viral. The heavy product placement, with logos for Olive Garden, Walmart, and FedEx prominently displayed, was also distracting and detracted from the overall experience. The story itself is not very engaging. It's hard to come up with an exciting plot for a character like Garfield, whose main traits are eating lasagna and hating Mondays. The plot involving Garfield meeting his long-lost dad and participating in a heist on a dairy farm doesn't feel very Garfield-esque. At times, it felt like the movie was originally intended to be about a generic cat, with Garfield added in later. Chris Pratt's interpretation of Garfield is fine, but not particularly distinct or memorable. The animation is nice, but there isn't enough movement to keep the audience's attention. Most of the jokes don't land, and I found myself wishing they had been more clever. Despite these criticisms, I do give the movie props for attempting to create a sentimental story with Garfield reuniting with his father and the cow and bull subplot. However, the plot still feels random and doesn't capture the essence of Garfield. In terms of ratings, I'd give the movie 2.5 stars for action, 2 stars for entertainment value, and 2 stars for the story. It gets no stars for horror and 1 star for suspense. For casual moviegoers, I'd rate it a B+, but for cinephiles and critics, it's more of a C. Overall, the Garfield movie is fine for a home viewing, but might not be worth paying to see in theaters. It's a harmless animated feature that kids will probably enjoy, but it's disappointingly generic and lacks the depth and charm that could make it memorable. If you're a die-hard Garfield fan, you might find it worth a watch, but I'd suggest waiting for it to be available for streaming. Review number 2. The excitement of reliving a piece of my childhood drew me to the newly released Garfield movie, a fully animated feature film for theaters. Directed by Mark Dindal and written by David Reynolds, both Disney veterans responsible for fan favorites, the movie promised a nostalgic trip back to the days when Garfield was my favorite piece of literature. However, my enthusiasm quickly met with a blend of highs and lows. The film prioritizes comedy, much like the original Garfield comics. The humor is a mix of Garfield's signature wit, pet antics, and Looney Tunes-style slapstick. While there are moments that manage to capture the essence of Garfield's charm, the comedy is not consistently funny. At best, the jokes are cute and might elicit a chuckle or two, but they rarely rise to the level of hilarity that would justify a full theatrical experience. The gags, while occasionally amusing, often feel more suited to a 90-minute cartoon special rather than a feature film. The story, unfortunately, feels like an afterthought. The plot intertwines a heist with Garfield reconnecting with his estranged father, Vic, but neither element is fully developed. The constant focus on humor often undermines any potential for meaningful character development, making the father-son relationship lack the emotional impact it could have had. The storytelling feels rushed, leaving little room for the movie to address its own narrative shortcomings. Visually, the animation is a mixed bag. While it's an upgrade from previous CG Garfield animations, the transition from 2D comic designs to 3D is not seamless. The characters are visually appealing, but the backgrounds lack the richness and immersion that one might hope for. The animation style occupies an awkward middle ground between realistic CG and abstract stylization. A more fully stylized approach, similar to the one used in the Peanuts movie, could have been a better fit. The movie tries to stand out by incorporating big-scale animation, and director Mark Dindal brings a strong understanding of cartoon logic to a modern audience. The character animation shines during slapstick moments, making the most out of animation principles to create comedic effects. The best gags are physical, especially when characters break logic and become self-aware that they are in a cartoon. This self-awareness adds a layer of humor that is reminiscent of classic cartoons. One of the movie's biggest selling points is the return of beloved characters from the comics, with some fresh updates and new faces joining the cast. While there are some differences compared to other media, the film ensures that these characters maintain the familiar personalities that audiences recognize. However, due to the script's heavy focus on comedy, the characters are often reduced to their basic attributes and tropes. Garfield, voiced by Chris Pratt, is portrayed as a more caring and self-aware version of himself. While Pratt's voice acting is a decent fit, the constant stream of sarcastic remarks can become grating. Vic, Garfield's long-lost father, carries much of the movie's heart, though his character remains underdeveloped beyond his role as Garfield's dad. John Arbuckle, the perpetually hapless owner of Garfield and Odie, has a limited role focused mainly on searching for his lost pets. The villain, Jinx, is a typical antagonist seeking revenge, but her character is elevated by Hannah Waddingham's enjoyable performance. The dogs, Otto and Odie, provide visual humor and contribute to the film's comedic moments. Surprisingly, there aren't many Easter eggs or references to Garfield's legacy in the film. The recognizable characters might be the weakest part, yet they fulfill their roles adequately. The movie captures the essence of reading Garfield comics, but doesn't add much to it. Overall, the Garfield movie is a harmless animated feature that kids might enjoy, but it falls disappointingly short of being memorable. The animation is decent, and some performances are enjoyable, but the film is ultimately generic and lacks the creativity and depth that could have made it stand out. For die-hard Garfield fans, it might be worth a watch, but I would suggest waiting for it to be available for streaming or catching it at home rather than making a special trip to the theater. Reflecting on director Mark Dindal's previous works, I place this movie somewhere in the middle. It's not as outstanding as The Emperor's New Groove or Cats Don't Dance, but it's also not as forgettable as Chicken Little. In the end, whether you enjoy this movie will largely depend on your affection for Garfield and your tolerance for a comedy that plays it safe. Review number 3. The new Garfield movie starring Chris Pratt has hit the screens, and I've got some thoughts to share. The marketing for this movie has been quite something. Overblown trailers and some pretty wild crossovers. But let's be real. Garfield is such an iconic pop culture character that the movie didn't really need to go all out to draw viewers in. Going into the movie, my expectations were pretty low, mainly because the trailers gave away so much. The film sticks to the standard formula for kids' animation and doesn't really bring anything new to the table. One thing that stood out to me was the frequent use of mobile phones in the movie. I'm a bit cynical about this trend, and it felt a bit much. The movie gives us an origin story for Garfield, showing a cute baby Garfield who quickly becomes the moody and arrogant cat we all know. Unfortunately, many of the jokes had already been spoiled in the trailers, and I didn't find them particularly funny. Again, the presence of mobile phones is highlighted, with numerous examples of phone usage throughout the film. The plot involves Garfield and Odie being kidnapped and forced to take part in a milk heist. It's a pretty contrived and cliché storyline, but it serves its purpose as an adventure tale. I did enjoy the villainous dogs. They were one of the more entertaining aspects. The dialogue and jokes were pretty simple and lacked originality. There were also product placements, like Olive Garden, which felt unnecessary. The plot itself didn't have much depth. For instance, Garfield's fear of spiders is introduced but never really explored. Overall, the movie isn't terrible, but it's not particularly special either. It's a typical kids' movie that plays it safe with familiar tropes and jokes. It's more suited for older kids than really young ones, but still pretty basic. While I've heard some positive reviews, I found it lacking. On a more positive note, the 2D backgrounds and designs are fantastic, a true love letter to animation. The animation, in general, is great, and I have no complaints about the visuals. The 3D design of the humans is particularly fun and works well in thumbnails. One joke that got the biggest laugh in the cinema was about Garfield being nicknamed Roadkill in the heist plan. However, it was overused and dragged out too long. There's a montage of the characters trying to get along and become a better team, but it mainly shows them getting beaten up. A standout moment was them sliding down a hill, going quiet when they see a family of bunnies, and then screaming again. It was a nice touch. Interestingly, Odie is portrayed as the smartest character in the group, which is a twist considering he's usually seen as the most clueless. The recurring gag of Odie doing craft projects in the background was amusing. The plot thickens with Garfield and his father reconciling while tied to a tree. It turns out his father didn't abandon him. He got stuck trying to find food and realized John could give Garfield a better life. The heist at the giant cheese factory is a highlight, with its cartoony setups and hazardous cheese areas. Despite this, the heist fails, and Garfield ends up in the pound. John rescues Garfield from the pound, and they reconcile. Garfield realizes his father saved him by sending him to the pound, knowing the villain would betray them. They then set out to rescue his father, who's trapped on a train and about to be thrown off a bridge. The final battle involves Garfield using drones to order food and wage battle against the villains, a fitting climax for a Garfield action sequence. There are other gags and moments, like the use of phones and a romantic subplot between a bull and a cow. The movie wraps up with Garfield returning home to have dinner with John and his father. A montage of good times ends with a punchline about the bill Garfield racked up for the finale. The post-credits scene teases a sequel. In conclusion, the Garfield movie is decent, but doesn't push any boundaries. The animation and some emotional moments are appreciated, but it feels like it's just filling a void with more content. Sony animation can be hit or miss, and while this movie is okay, I prefer when animated films push boundaries and offer something more unique.